It's news time. Information is power. Be current. The news headline. How PDP is sabotaging Buhari's fight against banditry. APC reviews. The news in full. The ruling party of the All Progressive Congress had actually reviewed how the PDP, that is the People's Democratic Party, who happens to be the main opposition party, has actually been sabotaging efforts of the federal government to curb the menace of the of banditry going on in the nation. The APC accused the PDP of playing politics with the fight against bandits, saying that this allegation was actually leveled by APC Secretary Senator John James Akpanode, saying that the mere suggestion that President Muhammadu Buhari and the APC are insensitive to the lives of victims of bandits was callous and politically motivated. It was also said by Akpanode, however, saying that the PDP was trying to turn a tragic situation into an object of politicking, and he said that suggestion by the opposition, that is the People's Democratic Party, that President Muhammadu Buhari was actually, insensitive to the heinous activities of bandits in part of the country should be seen for what it is, and it is politically motivated, callous, and insensitive to victims and our gallant troops battling to end the criminal activities of these terrorists going on in the country.
Public servant Professor Bolaji Owosanya, who provided the damning evidence of the modus operandi of the official racket in government. Already, in the 2022 budget, over 225 projects have been identified as duplications at the cost of 20 billion naira, prompting the House of Rep to set up a probe committee. There is nothing more than appeal to the persuaded Nigerians of his electability, anti-corruption personality during his first sojourn as military head of state in 1984 to 1986. Then, General Muhammadu Buhari was seen as the nemesis of corrupt politicians, and that image, which could not help him during previous electoral attempts, was capitalized on by the Southwest media to burnish and garnish a political reputation against an admittedly helplessly gutless and hapless leadership of Goodluck Jonathan. But history is a mercilessly ruthless judge. While previously clueless and corrupt, Jonathan has become a beautiful bride of international diplomacy and democratic behavior. The anti-corruption warrior is now mired in a government that, by its own reckoning, has become the most inept and corrupt in our history. To be fair, the president did not promise much in the electioneering campaigns in both elections. Throughout the campaigns, his mantra, repeated like a broken record, was fighting corruption, insurgency, and improving the economy. His performance on all three counts is suspect, dubious, and undistinguished. Most people would even declare him a failure. By its own admission, even the government does not point to any of them as its main achievement, which is curious. To it, their greatest achievement is building infrastructure, which was a kind of an afterthought, as it never featured in its 2015 election campaigns. The curiosity is, how could one major in a subject on which he was not tested in an examination? On his greatest failure, agreement will be as difficult to reach. Insecurity has become a major menace in the country, and no part of his nation is spared. But because that is not his greatest failure, nor is the crumbling economy, which he was never given a chance in the first place. It has never been this bad since the war, and although President Muhammadu Buhari was elected to deal with the problem of insurgency in the northeast, his regime was added the nefarious activities of herdsmen and now bandits, who have not only made life brutally short and unbearable for most rural communities, especially farmers who have abandoned their farms, which has led to the threat of food scarcity and hunger in the country. The Nigerians are paying such humongous price on account of corruption in the public service in a government that promised to stamp it out is a monumental indictment of President Muhammadu Buhari and his legitimacy for the office. The paradox is that for every extra kobo that goes into fictitious projects and salaries, There is a corresponding denial of public-oriented spending to improve people's lives. Also, such increase in recurrent spending is directly responsible for the unending borrowing by this government to fund its acclaimed infrastructure development in a situation that mortgages the future of the country and the next generation. Consequently, the reason we are borrowing is not entirely because there is no money, as government has consistently maintained, but because its employees are siphoning the money into their private pockets at the expense of the generality of Nigerians. The obvious implication of this development is that the current anti-corruption strategy is defective and inappropriate, thinking that the main culprits in corruption are the political office holders. This view featured heavily in Buhari's approach in dealing with members of the Second Republic political class. But it is simply untenable because the political class does not have accounting powers, which belongs to the career civil servants. So it is financially impossible for the politicians to steal money from government coffers without the active involvement and collusion of the bureaucrats themselves. Also, for a minister or commissioner to steal a dime, the bureaucrat must be involved. Entire budgets of the country through the manners of expenditure. They also prepare the budget. Therefore, we have to revise and change the approach and train searchlight more on the public servants to actually get to the root of the matter. And also, focusing on the few political office holders is a waste of time and resources, which has been proved by the failure of this government to stamp out corruption in the country, and there is need to digitalize government processes to reduce human interference which ultimately conduces for corruption. But most importantly, government must improve the remuneration of public servants to motivate them and discourage corrupt practices. However, it is necessary to properly determine the right workforce in the country. And this evidence from the COVID-19 measures, which has kept level 1 to level 13 workers, constituting over 85% of the personnel at home for over a year, and shows that most of them are not really needed. And this is the reason why it is better for the government to focus more on how to further ensure that the civil workers are actually, given much more support so that they can be motivated, and therefore, the practices of the corrupt practices would actually be extremely minimal, if not stopped entirely. And this would help us to ensure that the root of corruption is actually destroyed. Thanks for listening.